My name is Edith. I am 74 years old, and I have lived long enough to know what betrayal feels like. But nothing prepared me for the day my own son and his wife abandoned me at the train station, with no money, no ticket, and no plan. For years, I had given them everything. When my husband passed away, I sold our small house in the countryside and moved closer to my son, Daniel, and his wife, Melissa. I wanted to be near them, to help them with their children, and to make sure they never felt the loneliness I had begun to feel after losing the love of my life. But sometimes love blinds you. Sometimes you don't see how people slowly change when greed and selfishness take over. It all started with small things. Melissa would complain about the way I cooked. She would roll her eyes when I told stories to the grandchildren. Daniel, my son, my only child, would stay silent, pretending not to notice. I convinced myself it was just stress, just busy lives. I told myself they still love me. They're just tired. But the truth was darker. One afternoon, Daniel came into my room with a forced smile. "Mom, Melissa and I thought it would be nice if you took a short trip," he said. "A trip?" I asked, confused. "Yes. A train ride to visit an old friend, maybe? You've been cooped up here for too long." I didn't understand why he suddenly wanted me gone, but I didn't argue. Maybe he really did want me to have some joy, some adventure. He even promised to drive me to the station and help me with my bags. That morning, I wore my best dress, the one my husband used to say made me look beautiful. I packed a small suitcase, mostly with memories, a photograph of my late husband, a rosary, and the knitted blanket I had made for Daniel when he was a boy. I felt nervous, but also strangely excited. When we arrived at the train station, Daniel and Melissa walked me inside. I looked around at the busy crowd, the sound of whistles and rolling luggage echoing through the hall. I held onto my son's arm, feeling grateful that he cared enough to bring me. But then something strange happened. Melissa handed Daniel a small envelope. He looked inside, nodded quickly, and then turned to me. "Mom, wait here for just a minute. I'll go get your ticket," he said. So I waited. I sat on a hard bench, clutching my bag, watching people hug and say their goodbyes. Families held hands. Children laughed. Elderly couples leaned on each other. And I sat there, alone, waiting for my son to come back. Minutes passed, then half an hour, then nearly an hour. I began to feel uneasy. My legs trembled as I stood and looked around. Daniel was nowhere. Melissa was gone too. I checked my purse. No money, no phone. They had taken everything from me except the suitcase. Finally, an announcement rang through the speakers. "Last call for platform 3. I rushed toward the platform, hoping to see Daniel. Instead, I saw the back of his head, walking quickly with Melissa toward the exit doors. They weren't buying me a ticket. They weren't planning a surprise. They were leaving me there, abandoned. "Daniel!" I cried out, my voice shaking, but the sound of trains drowned me out. He never turned back. I collapsed onto the bench again, tears streaming down my face. My heart pounded with fear and disbelief. How could he? How could my own son do this to me? The station grew quieter as the trains departed. Travelers left in groups, and the once busy hall began to empty. Soon I was nearly alone, sitting with nothing but my small suitcase and a heart full of betrayal. For the first time in my life, I felt truly invisible, forgotten. But what Daniel and Melissa didn't know was that fate had other plans for me that day. As I sat there, trembling, a shadow fell across me. A voice I hadn't heard in decades called my name, soft, familiar, and filled with surprise. Edith, the voice said. I looked up, and my breath caught in my chest. Standing before me was someone I thought I would never see again. When I heard my name, my whole body froze. Edith, the voice repeated, softer this time, almost in disbelief. I slowly raised my eyes, and there he was, Arthur Bennett. Arthur had been my neighbor when I was a young woman, long before I met my husband. He was tall, with kind blue eyes that hadn't changed, even though decades had carved lines on his face, just like mine. We had once shared dreams, conversations under the stars, and promises we were too young to keep. Life had taken us down different paths, but now, at this lonely station, fate had brought him back to me. Arthur? My voice cracked. His eyes widened as he dropped the suitcase he was carrying. My God, it is you. What are you doing here? Alone? I couldn't stop the tears. Shame burned my cheeks. I don't know, I stammered. My son. He was supposed to buy me a ticket, but he never came back. Arthur frowned deeply, his jaw tightening. He sat beside me, placing his warm, steady hand over mine. Edith, tell me everything, he said. And so I did. The words spilled out like broken glass. How I had sold my house to move near Daniel. How Melissa treated me like a burden. How Daniel stood silent, letting her cruelty grow. And finally, how they left me here with no money, no phone, no way home. Arthur's face turned pale with anger. They left you here? Alone? At your age? That's unforgivable. I lowered my eyes, whispering, maybe I deserve it. Maybe I've been too dependent. Don't you dare say that, Arthur interrupted firmly. You raised that boy. You gave him everything, and this is how he repays you. His voice trembled with both rage and sorrow. For the first time in hours, I felt something I thought I had lost. Protection. With Arthur sitting beside me, I no longer felt invisible. Come with me, he said suddenly, standing tall. Where? I asked, startled. To my home. You're not staying here another minute. I hesitated. I can't. I don't want to be a burden again. Arthur smiled sadly. Edith, you could never be a burden. Not to me. Arthur took my suitcase as if it weighed nothing and guided me out of the station. His car, a modest but well-kept sedan, was parked just outside. He opened the passenger door gently, like an old gentleman who hadn't forgotten how to treat a lady with respect. As we drove through the quiet streets, memories flooded my mind of the time when Arthur and I had danced in his parents' barn to a broken radio, of the long walks where we dreamed about the future. I had chosen another path, but now destiny had circled back in the most unexpected way. At his house, Arthur led me into a cozy living room filled with books, photographs, and the smell of freshly baked bread. This is your home now, he said. I shook my head. Arthur, I can't stay. You can, he insisted gently. At least until you figure out what you want to do. And Edith, you don't owe those people anything. Not your son, not his wife. You gave enough. I sank into the couch, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, someone was speaking for me, not against me. The next morning, Arthur prepared breakfast. He set the table with care, pouring tea the way I liked it, as if he remembered. Over warm bread and butter, we talked about the years that had passed. He had never married. Life had been lonely, but he had built a small business, made good investments, and lived quietly. I, on the other hand, spoke of my late husband with love, of the years Daniel was young and sweet, and of how everything changed after Melissa came into the picture. Arthur listened carefully, his eyes never leaving mine. "Edith," he finally said, "they took advantage of your kindness. But you're not powerless. You still have your dignity, your strength, and more than you realize." His words lit a small spark inside me. For years, I had been shrinking, apologizing for existing, walking on eggshells in my own son's home. But here, with Arthur, I felt seen again. Later that day, Arthur drove me back to the station, not to leave me, but because I needed to retrieve something important. My suitcase still carried the photograph of my husband and the blanket I had knitted for Daniel. I wasn't ready to let those go. As we walked through the crowded hall, I spotted someone familiar in the distance. Daniel. He stood there with Melissa, arguing quietly but heatedly. They hadn't left town. They had abandoned me, but they were still nearby, spending the money they had taken from me, no doubt. Arthur's hand tightened around mine. "Do you want to face them?" he asked gently. My heart pounded. A part of me wanted to run, to avoid the confrontation, but another part, the stronger part, whispered, "No, they need to see me. They need to know I'm not broken." I straightened my back and walked forward. Melissa's eyes widened when she saw me. How are you still here?" she stuttered. Daniel looked pale, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. "I'm still here." "I see." After that confrontation at the station, I knew things could never go back to how they were. For years, I had begged for scraps of love and respect from my son, but standing there with Arthur by my side, I finally realized something important. I didn't need their approval to exist. I didn't need their home, their table, or even their phone calls. What I needed was my dignity back. Arthur drove me home to his little cottage, and that evening, we sat by the fireplace. He looked at me with those calm blue eyes and said, "Edith, you can't keep living in fear of them. You have the right to stand tall. They've taken enough from you." His words settled deep in my heart. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was thinking about fighting back. The next morning, I pulled out an old tin box from my suitcase. Inside were letters from my late husband, William, and the deed to the house we had once owned. My son and his wife thought they had taken everything when they sold the house I had moved into later. But what they didn't know was that William had left me more than memories. He had left me investments, small but steady, that I had never touched. I always thought I'd pass them on to Daniel when the time came. But now I realized, why should I? With Arthur's help, I visited the bank. My hands shook as I signed the papers, withdrawing enough to secure my independence. The clerk, a kind woman, smiled and said, "It's good to see someone your age still making bold moves." Bold. No one had called me that in decades. Later that week, I saw Daniel's number flashing on Arthur's phone. He had called me at least 5 times after the station incident, no doubt realizing he might have pushed too far. I let it ring. Then came the text. "Mom, we need to talk." "Melissa didn't mean it. We want you back, as if I was some piece of furniture they could discard and then bring back when convenient." I deleted the message, but I wasn't done yet. If they thought I would fade quietly, they were mistaken. Arthur encouraged me to think about what I wanted, not what they wanted from me. So I made a decision. I would buy a small cottage of my own. Not too far from Arthur's, but far enough that I could build my own life. A place where I wasn't unwanted, where every corner didn't remind me of Melissa's sharp tongue or Daniel's silence. When I signed the purchase agreement, I cried, not from sadness, but from relief. For years, I thought I needed my son to survive. But here I was, proving myself wrong. The news of my purchase must have reached Daniel somehow, because soon after, he appeared at Arthur's doorstep with Melissa at his side. Melissa's face was twisted with fake concern, her voice sugar-coated as she said, "We're so glad you're safe, Edith. We were worried sick." Her lies were bitter in my ears. I looked straight at her, my voice steady. "You left me at the station with no ticket, no money, and no way home." "That's not worry. That's cruelty," Daniel tried to interject. "Mom, listen, Melissa didn't mean—" I cut him off, something I had never dared to do before. "No, Daniel. This isn't about what she meant. This is about what you allowed. You watched her treat me like dirt. You stood silent while she stripped me of my dignity. And I will never forget that." For the first time, Daniel looked shaken. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes darted away. Melissa huffed, rolling her eyes, but I continued. "You both thought I was powerless. You thought you could break me, use me, discard me. But you were wrong. I have a home now, money of my own, and friends who care. I don't need you. Not anymore." Arthur stood beside me, his presence strong and unwavering. Melissa's mask cracked, her face flushing red with anger. "Fine," she snapped, dragging Daniel toward the car. "If that's how you feel, don't expect us to come running back." I smiled faintly. "I won't." As they stormed off, Arthur turned to me. "How do you feel?" I took a deep breath. "Like I've taken my life back." That night, as I sat in my new cottage, unpacking the few belongings I had left, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The betrayal still hurt, yes, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't just a discarded mother. I was Edith Walker, a woman who had survived loss, betrayal, and abandonment, and who had found the strength to rise again. But deep inside, I also knew something else. This wasn't the end of my story with Daniel and Melissa. They had underestimated me once. The next time they tried to cross me, they would discover just how much strength they had awakened in me. This was no longer just about survival. This was about justice, and I was ready for it. After settling into my small cottage, I started to rebuild myself piece by piece. Every morning, I opened the curtains, breathed in the fresh air, and reminded myself that I wasn't a prisoner in my son's house anymore. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt like freedom. Arthur visited often, bringing groceries or just sharing tea by the fire. He treated me with a kindness I had almost forgotten existed. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before Daniel and Melissa tried to pull me back into their world. And I was right. One afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from Daniel. His handwriting was messy, rushed, almost desperate. "Mom, I don't know why you're shutting me out. Melissa and I need your help. Please call me." I almost laughed. For years, they had drained me of every ounce of patience, every penny I could spare, and now they dared to ask for help again. But instead of throwing the letter away, I kept it. Something told me I would need it later. The very next week, I got another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Daniel. It was a man in a suit. "Mrs. Walker?" he asked. "I'm here regarding some financial matters concerning your son." My stomach tightened. As it turned out, Daniel and Melissa had taken loans under my name years ago when I first moved in with them. They had promised me it was just paperwork to help them with bills. I had trusted them. Now the truth was crawling out. They had used my credit, my savings, and even tried to access my late husband's investments. For a moment, my old self returned, the quiet, frightened woman who thought she couldn't survive without her son. But then Arthur's words echoed in my mind. You have more power than you realize. I straightened my back and told the man, yes, I'd like to review all the documents, and I'd like to speak to a lawyer. His eyes widened a little, maybe surprised at my firmness, but he nodded. That night, Arthur sat with me at the kitchen table as we went through every paper. His brows furrowed deeper with every page. Edith, they've been using you. They've been treating you like a bank. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with anger. Then it's time they learn they can't anymore, I said quietly. The next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office, my head held high. The woman across the desk listened carefully as I told her everything. How I had been abandoned, how they had taken money in my name, how they had tried to erase me from my own life. When I finished, she leaned back and said, Mrs. Walker, you have a strong case. Not only can we stop them from using your name, but we can also reclaim damages for what they've already done. For the first time in years, I felt not just hopeful, but powerful. A few weeks later, Daniel came storming to my cottage, Melissa right behind him, her face twisted with fury. Mom, how could you? He shouted. How could you drag lawyers into this? Melissa sneered. You think anyone's going to believe you over us? You're old. You're confused. I raised my hand, silencing her. My voice was steady, stronger than I thought it could be. No, Melissa. I may be old, but I am not confused. I know exactly what you did. You stole from me. You lied to me. And now you'll answer for it. Arthur appeared in the doorway, his presence solid as a wall. Daniel's eyes darted nervously between us. For once, he didn't look like the son I had raised. He looked like a stranger. You'll regret this, Melissa spat, before dragging Daniel away. But I knew the truth. It wasn't me who would regret anything. That night, I sat by the fire in my new home, Arthur across from me, and I whispered, I never thought I'd have the strength to fight them. He smiled gently. That strength was always there, Edith. They just tried to bury it. As the days turned into weeks, the legal battle began. Letters, calls, and meetings filled my calendar. But instead of feeling drained, I felt alive. I was no longer the helpless woman at the train station. I was a mother who had been wronged, a wife who carried her late husband's strength, and a woman who would no longer be silenced. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Daniel and Melissa thought they had destroyed me, but what they really did was awaken something far more dangerous. The day of the first hearing came faster than I expected. I stood outside the courthouse, my hands wrapped tightly around my purse. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from determination. Arthur stood by my side, a steady presence as always. You're not alone, he whispered, and those words gave me courage. Inside the courtroom, Daniel and Melissa sat at the opposite table. Melissa's lips were curled into a smirk, her eyes darting to me with disdain. Daniel avoided my gaze, his face pale. I could almost hear his thoughts. Mom won't go through with this. She's too weak. She'll forgive us like always. But this time, they were wrong. My lawyer, Miss Green, rose to speak first. Her voice was calm, but sharp as a knife. She presented the documents, the loans in my name, the signatures I never gave, the funds they had drained. Each paper hit the table like a hammer. Melissa whispered furiously to Daniel, her fake confidence beginning to crack. Then it was their turn. Daniel stumbled through excuses, blaming misunderstandings and paperwork confusion. Melissa chimed in, insisting I had memory problems. My blood boiled, but I stayed quiet, waiting. When Ms. Green called me to the stand, I walked forward slowly, each step echoing in the silent room. I held my head high. The judge asked me to explain in my own words what had happened. I told everything: how I sold my house to be near Daniel, how Melissa's words cut me every day, how they left me at the train station like trash. My voice trembled at first, but then it grew stronger. I described the shame, the loneliness, the betrayal. I spoke of the signatures I never gave, the money I never saw, the love I had given freely that was thrown back in my face. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward, his expression heavy with disapproval, not at me, but at them. Melissa jumped to her feet, shouting, "She's lying! She's old. She doesn't remember." The judge banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Johnson. This is not a place for theatrics." Melissa's face turned crimson, but she obeyed. For the first time, I saw Daniel's mask slip, his eyes filled with regret, or maybe just fear. He knew the tide was turning. Weeks passed as the case unfolded. Evidence piled against them. Witnesses came forward. Neighbors who had seen how Melissa treated me. A bank clerk who remembered Daniel pushing me to sign papers I clearly didn't understand. Piece by piece, the truth came out. Then came the day of judgment. The courtroom was packed. I sat gripping Arthur's hand as the judge read his decision. It is clear that Mrs. Walker was exploited, abandoned, and financially abused. Therefore, the court rules in her favor. All debts in her name are to be cleared immediately. Furthermore, damages are to be paid by Daniel Walker and Melissa Johnson for the emotional and financial harm they have caused. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. Melissa gasped loudly, turning on Daniel with fury. "This is your fault," she hissed. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply exhaled, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I had carried for far too long. Justice had spoken. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions. "Mrs. Walker, do you have anything to say?" I looked straight into the camera and said, "No one, no matter how old or vulnerable, should be treated like they don't matter. Family is supposed to protect you, not destroy you." Arthur placed his arm around me as we walked away, and for the first time in decades, I felt free. But I also knew this wasn't just about freedom anymore. It was about rebuilding. I had stood up, I had fought back, and I had won. But now came the next chapter, the one where I truly lived for myself. And deep down, I knew Daniel and Melissa weren't done. People like them rarely give up. But the difference was clear now. I wasn't the same Edith who had once sat abandoned at a train station. I was stronger, and next time they tried to strike, I would be ready. After the court's decision, life slowly began to feel different. For the first time in years, I woke up without fear of Melissa's sharp voice or Daniel's silence. My little cottage became a sanctuary, filled with warmth and light. Every morning, I opened the curtains and whispered to myself, "This is mine. This life is mine." Arthur was with me often. He'd help fix things around the house, bring me flowers from his garden, or simply sit and drink tea while we talked about the old days. But we didn't just talk about the past anymore. We talked about the future. It felt strange at first. For so long, I thought my future was gone, but now it was opening up before me, full of possibility. Daniel tried to call me a few times. Each time, I let it go unanswered. The truth was, I no longer had anything to say to him. Love had blinded me for years, but respect was gone, and without respect, there could be no relationship. One day, I wrote him a letter. Daniel, I will always wish you well, but until you learn what family means, I cannot be part of your life. Do not contact me again until you are ready to change. I never knew if he read it, but for my heart, it was enough. Melissa, on the other hand, was furious. I heard through neighbors that she blamed me for everything, for their financial troubles, for Daniel's shame, for their life falling apart. But instead of feeling guilt like I used to, I felt nothing. They had made their choices. I had finally made mine. Arthur and I began spending more time together, not just as old friends, but as two souls who had found each other again after decades. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Arthur took my hand and said, "Edith, I know life has been cruel to you, but I believe it's never too late for happiness. Would you let me share this next chapter with you?" Tears filled my eyes. At my age, I thought love was a closed door, but here it was again, knocking gently. I nodded, smiling through my tears. "Yes, Arthur, I like that very much." In that moment, I realized something powerful. My story wasn't one of loss anymore. It was one of survival, strength, and rebirth. I had been abandoned, humiliated, and nearly broken, but I rose again. And now, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Months later, as autumn leaves painted the town gold, I hosted a small gathering in my cottage. Arthur, a few kind neighbors, and some church friends filled the rooms with laughter and warmth. For the first time, my home echoed with joy instead of silence. I looked around and thought, this is family too. Not by blood, but by love. Daniel and Melissa's names never came up again. They became part of my past, not my future. And that was how it needed to be. One evening, I sat by the fireplace with Arthur and whispered, "Do you think I was too harsh with Daniel?" He shook his head. "No, Edith. Sometimes love means letting go. You gave him chance after chance. You saved yourself when he wouldn't." His words comforted me, and for once, I believed them. The lesson I carried was simple but strong. Age does not make you powerless, and family is not defined by blood, but by love, respect, and kindness. And so, my story ended not with abandonment at a train station, but with a new beginning in a little cottage, hand in hand with someone who reminded me that life is still worth living, even after betrayal, even after heartbreak. I was no longer the woman who begged for love. I was the woman who found strength, dignity, and peace. And that, to me, was the greatest revenge of all.